Hello and welcome to the latest in the series of NR Times Roundtable discussions. My name's Alistair McCall. I'm delighted to be hosting the discussion today on behalf of NR Times. And today we're going to be focusing on brain injury in the workplace. We've got a fabulous group of panellists who have agreed to share their insight and their experience with us today. So I'm going to ask each of our panellists to introduce themselves, say a little bit about themselves, their organisations and their areas of particular interest. So if I can come to you firstly, Elinor.
Yep. Hello, good morning. My name's Elinor. I'm a specialist occupational therapist. I work for Elysium Healthcare in the neurological section. So we work with a whole range of brain injuries, and I specialise within the rehab section. So I've got a lot of background experience in prolonged disorders of consciousness, but also work with a lot of people in terms of functional rehab as well.
Great, thanks very much, Elinor. And Jyoti.
So I'm Jyoti Evans. I'm the lead clinical psychologist for Circle Rehabilitation in Birmingham. So we are a level 2 brain injury unit. So we take people from major trauma centres and even from the community, depending on how they're doing, who've had brain injuries and need some rehab. So for me, my role really is about cognitive assessments, thinking about how people's brain pathology may have changed and how that impacts on cognition and how a person functions in day-to-day life. And my main areas of interest are obviously rehab, but along with that, complex capacity assessments, case management, and I also do awake craniotomies within the major trauma service.
Great, thanks very much, Jyoti. Barry.
My name is Barry Lehane. I'm a nurse by background. And I have been since 1996, which makes me quite old. I've worked in brain injury rehab since 1999 when I qualified, and I'm a case manager, and I've been a case manager since about 2013, 2014, and I'm head of rehabilitation at Empowering You Case Management. And I'm also a non-executive director of Headway County Durham. So that's a special area of interest for me that I've been involved in for about the last 15 years. So today's discussion kind of ties in very closely with that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Barry. And last but not least, Stephen from Barr.
Hi, everyone. Alistair, thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure to take part in these roundtables. So I'm Stephen Ackerman, Solicitor Director at Barr Solicitors. We're a small outfit, but we deal with a lot of complex cases, complex injuries, in particular, serious and traumatic and obviously subtle brain injuries. They both have their challenges, both have their difficulties in assessment, treatment, rehab, OTs. And so we try to bring it all together, instruct the right people so, our clients can get the treatment they need. And we always try to say, even though it doesn't really work, but we try that, you focus on your rehabilitation, doctors, nurses, whoever, and then we'll try to focus on litigation. It doesn't always work that way. It is stressful, but we do our best to, they have enough on their plate to deal with, and so we try to separate the two as much as possible. It's not really possible, but we try to have a little bit of a barrier so they can, they have head injury as it is a brain injury. They don't need, keep the stress down is something that obviously helps them, which is what we try to do.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Just to kick the discussion off, I think most of the people watching the call will understand that the workplace can play an absolutely fundamental role in the post-injury journey towards independence and a fulfilling life, but it can also represent challenges as well. I'd like to go around the panel and ask each of the panelists, just to start the discussion, to really address what the challenges and issues are with reference to brain injury in the workplace, and we'll move on to talk about the positive role that the workplace can play in recovery and supporting those with brain injuries. So we'll go round in the same order again and start with you, Elinor, if that's okay, to talk about the key issues and maybe some of the challenges as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a lot of challenges in terms of the workplace after a brain injury. Things like stigma to start with. There's a lot of stigma after a brain injury, But then when you look at terms of actually in the workplace and that individual return to the workplace, they've got a lot of deficits sometimes after that brain injury, depending on the role. So things impacting on their concentration, overstimulation, fatigue, retention, and depending on that, the nature of their injury, their personality could be quite changed as well. So if you're working with a lot of different characters in your workplace and you are now a disinhibited individual, that could be really impacting on your relationships in your workplace as well. So depending on how the support is that you in your workplace, that could have quite a negative impact.
Thanks, Elinor. Jyoti.
Yeah, so I think within the workplace it's really tricky because brain injury, sometimes people can present as walking wounded. On the outside, they look really well. They're walking, they're talking, they look their normal selves. But actually, internally, the mechanisms that were once there have been disrupted. And so I think in the workplace, the biggest challenge is that differential between, well, the person looks like they used to, so why aren't they performing like they used to? And I think that's a key thing I've seen for those people who've gone back to work post brain injury. The other thing is, taking into account fatigue levels and how quickly somebody gets tired, the need for a bespoke sort of job description, if that's the way we want to put it. So taking into account periods for rest, and it's difficult because employers want you to be productive. They don't, they understand people need breaks, but sometimes with a brain injury, a person needs more breaks or adjusted hours, or they do better at certain times of the day than others. So I think it's getting that understanding of what a brain injury looks like and how that will then impact from the person you see in front of you who looks the same, but actually their brain may not be functioning in the same way it did before. And I think the role of occupational health is really important in that, because one would hope that occupational health will be able to have the right professionals on board to be able to help the company or the employer to get that person back into the workspace. Because for a lot of people with brain injuries, their biggest concern is, am I going to lose my independence? I want to be able to work. I want to be able to go out and do my job and see my friends and have that sense of purpose and that role in my life. So I think the biggest challenge is employers potentially having that understanding of what the brain injury looks like for that person, and then what they need to put in place to help the person to be able to do their job to the best ability. So that I think for me is the big challenge. It's that walking wounded sort of presentation.
Thanks, Jyoti. I think we'll come back to that question at some point in discussion about education and awareness and understanding amongst employers. Barry, your perspective?
Yeah, to absolutely reiterate what both Elinor and Jyoti have said, that's really, really true. And I suppose one of the biggest challenges that we come across is that there's so many different types of brain injury, the subtle brain injuries, the post-concussion syndrome. It's such a broad area, and it's difficult for employers as well in terms of making the reasonable adjustments. I think we've all worked with people who've had very complex physical disabilities, and getting somebody back to work who's in a wheelchair or things like that, the reasonable adjustment can be relatively easily made. You can put ramps, you can do all these things to help somebody who needs things like that. With somebody with a complex brain injury, it can be really, really difficult. And I suppose part of the challenge is, from our perspective, it's not just getting them into work, it's sustaining them at work, and it's helping somebody. Are they still at work? It's in 6 months' time. Are they still at work in 12 years' time, or 6 years' time? And that can be really challenging. And kind of within the litigation sphere and within case management, it's about working very slowly to get to those goals. And it's about supporting the individuals, because obviously some of the biggest challenges are, I live in the north of England, and people's work is a huge part of their identity. I think all of us sitting around this group, what we do for a living, it's one of the first things you have in a conversation with somebody. You tell them what you do for a living. If somebody's sustained a brain injury, whether that's catastrophic or a minor brain injury, I'm using the word minor brain injury. I think minor brain injury is a fallacy, but I think a brain injury is a brain injury. It can be really difficult if you take somebody. It really people can struggle with their identity if their work has been affected. Sorry, I don't know if I've answered the question there, so I'll mute myself there. Yeah.
No, that's great, Barry. I mean, really, this is just about unpicking, what the key issues are, and you've addressed some really significant ones there. I also know that as you go around the panel, this discussion becomes a bit trickier because, you run the risk of repeating what others have said, because I know there'll be very common views. But Stephen, you'll have a very specific view of this from a legal and litigation perspective, I guess.
Yeah. So, sorry. So, that's right. So obviously what we try to do, what we always say is obviously follow medical advice. We're not doctors. Obviously, I deal with doctors all day. I deal with OTs and everyone. And I have an insight, but I don't have a medical degree. I've not been to medical school. So obviously, we always say, if just because you recommend something doesn't mean you should do it, make sure it's okay with your doctors. That's number one. But in terms of litigation, from purely litigation perspective, it's very important that people work if they can, because they have to prove their claim, and there's always allegations of them being malingerers. Really, it's not that bad, especially what Jyoti said about the walking wounded. They look okay, and then they're not working. Are you really injured? And of course they are, but they look okay. So there's allegations that they're being dishonest and fraudulent, and because a very small subset of people, can be for financial gain. They tar everyone with the same brush. So from a purely litigation perspective, it's very, very important to return to work. But then we have to be practical. Are there people able to do it? So what we always tell people is, first of all, even if you can volunteer, right? Even if it's unpaid. And I see it a lot of time is that, again, I'm talking just purely from seeing it, not from it is a medical perspective, but not without any medical training, in the sense that the clients, when they do something, it actually helps them. It helps with the treatment. It helps with them have some sort of recovery, and they feel better about themselves. So I always tell them, speak to your doctor and make sure that it won't make things worse. Obviously, it's over nice me telling them something, but I don't want them to get worse, God forbid. So, but assuming you can do it, volunteer, even volunteer. Then it shows, first of all, the defendant that you're willing. When you can get to paid work, you can't do paid work because you're a bit unreliable, not your fault, it's your injury, that's fine. But volunteer, the very nature of it, will be more flexible. You can come and go almost as pleased. They do some reliability, but it's much less. And then they feel more fulfilled. They're getting out of bed for something. And then I find it helps with the treatment. They're working towards something. They're not just sitting at home thinking about it all day. I've just, from dealing with clients, it's the worst. It's just the worst. They just, I say the word obsessed, but I don't mean that in a pejorative. I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just a reality. They just think about it and turn it over in their head. It's just counterproductive. So they have to go out. They have to do something, fulfilling. And yeah, again, I'm sure the OTs will say this. I hope I'm not out of line, stepping on their toes, but even family members, we try to tell them, help them, but don't overdo it, because people want to be nice, but too much help is actually counterproductive also. It's taking their independence away, actually then feeds into the condition. There is certainly a physical, I'm not saying they're not disabled. I'm not saying they don't need help, but it's all encompassing. It's a global thing, and all the different pieces. So we try to balance it out to do the best that we can, in conjunction with treating doctors, the medical legal doctors, and OTs, and whoever we're speaking to.
Thanks, Stephen. That's really helpful. We touched a short while ago, after Jyoti spoke, about education and awareness. What are the misconceptions that employers suffer from, and how can these be challenged? And how big a role does education and awareness and understanding of employers play into making this, a positive part of recovery and from those suffering from brain injuries? Can I just sort of open it up for sort of contributions? Just give me a little, wave or something, and I'll bring people in. Jyoti, you look as though you want.
Yeah. So I think I think it's not that employers don't want to help their employees. I don't believe that's the case. I think it's just like we said, it's the misunderstanding. And I think in terms of how we can improve, the difficulty is brain injury might be a very small population of a employee base within a company, and it can be really difficult to tailor things to lots of different people with different needs. But I think that the role of education is really important, because what it helps an employer to do is to help their employee to get back to work, to get back to that independence. A lot of people I speak to will say, I don't want to be on benefits. I don't want to be living from week to week, not knowing, am I going to be able to pay my rent? Am I going to be able to, afford to heat because I'm on X amount of money under statutory sick pay? What they want to be able to do is to get back into work. And what I find is a lot of people will try and do that, perhaps sometimes a bit quickly than they should, because they don't feel like they don't have a choice. And part of that choice is, and I know this is probably going to be some of the sections later on, but it's access to services. So you look at, for example, the waiting times for community neuro rehab. For psychology, you're talking 2 years plus. So people, they don't want to wait 2 years for assessments, and it's tricky. And companies sort of depend on external agencies to help them, because what they want is the experts in the field to help them, to help their employee. But a 2-year wait is a really long time. And so companies they're a bit stuck as well. So I think it's a system thing. And I know that will probably come later on. But I think it's a whole system thing, and the awareness of brain injury and what's out there to help people. And it's knowing what's out there, because you can Google things and there's things out there, and then you look and it's like, well, we only work in X area of the country. So I think, yeah, I don't know if I've answered the question, but what I do know is that employers face just as many challenges. For example, I had a lady who worked within a bank and was making just slight errors here and there, but it's because she was so fatigued. And what the employer did was they thought it was more of a conduct route, that the person's not doing their job properly. But actually what we found was it was the sheer fact that she was sat behind a counter for 4 or 5 hours without a break, and then that fatigue set in. And so once they understood, well, actually, if this person can take a break, even if it's for 15 minutes every 2 hours, you get more productivity. They were able to do that, and the problem sort of resolved itself. So that understanding for companies and employers is really important, but it's also the understanding for the person, because people often want to push themselves, but they have to understand the importance of rest and fatigue on what they do.
That's a great illustration, Jyoti. Barry.
Yeah, I think that's really, really, really true, the fatigue that you were describing there. I suppose another education piece is for people to understand when they've had a brain injury. I grew up playing a lot of different sports, rugby, football, and cycling, and different things. And the subtle brain injuries that we're now learning more about. If you turned up to work on Monday morning and you say, well, actually, I was out on Friday night and I was knocked out, but I'm fine now. That's absolutely great. But if you don't acknowledge that you've had a brain injury, in 3 months' time, you're being performance managed, and you could be performance managed out the door effectively on capability, as opposed to actually, I sustained a brain injury 3 months ago that I never acknowledged. Subtle changes in my personality, subtle changes. And if people don't appreciate that and understand that, I think there's a lot more awareness now of the importance of, if you get knocked out, to get checked out, and all these different things. And organizations like Headway are doing a lot of education around these things. But as employers, if they learn these things, then it can only help. If you can understand, actually, Jeff was playing rugby on Saturday and he got knocked out for 2 minutes, but he's fine now. Maybe keep slightly more of an eye on Jeff next week, and things like that. As I said, Headway have a fantastic page on their website about work. I think Jyoti was going to reference the same thing there. It's really good. It's a really good tool that I use quite a lot with my clients. And it goes through the return to work hierarchy very, very well. It's a really useful tool that I would direct lots of people to. So yeah, I think it's trying to support from an educational point of view, educate the individual and educate the employer. Plus, we haven't mentioned the fact that what happens if the head injury happened at work, and you're trying to achieve a return to work with all that going on, kind of from the litigation point of view, and achieve a return to work in the place where the injury happened. There's a lot to think about and take on board.
Thanks, Barry. Stephen.
Yeah, just to pick up on the last point Barry made first about what if the accident, the injury happened at work. I mean, I find, and I don't think there's any bad players here or bad actors. If the serious injury happened at work, it's very difficult for them to return to work. From a psychological perspective, I don't think there's any bad faith on anyone's part.
No.
Sometimes there is, but generally speaking, I think employers do try, but the individual just finds it too mentally challenging, psychologically challenging, and I understand it completely. Don't get me wrong. They've been there for 20 years, and then there's a claim, and then the insurance companies get involved, and they're defending it. How could they defend it? They injured me, and obviously it's not personal, but you're asking for a lot of money, and they have to prove it. So they're doing their job. It's a very ugly process, but it's not personal process. But I understand why they take it personally. So that's number one. I find if it happens there, almost always they have to find work elsewhere. Again, I don't think there's any bad faith. I think it's just the way it is, for better or for worse. That's the way it is. But in terms of generally, if it happened outside of work, there's that tension, isn't there? That I think people want to help. Generally, people are good people. They want to help people, but they also have other employees to take care of. And if too many other employees have to pick up for this other employee who's been injured, again, they want to help, but they're getting paid for their job. And it's not because, again, it's not because they're not nice people. They're certainly willing to help out for, a few months, let them get back on the feet. Most people are generous, nice people. But at the end of the day, there's so many other things to juggle, not just at this individual. And I think people do try. And sometimes, again, no fault of anyone, it doesn't work out because the role needs something specific. And then, again, if you have a head injury and you're a construction worker, you might not be able to do that anymore. With the best will in the world, you can't do it. Again, no one's fault, but you have to change. And sometimes it happens even with the best will in the world. And I said it in another talk. I'll just say it again. From a personal perspective, I really get the fatigue and not feeling well. I said it in another one when I was, I think, 16 or 17. So going back a long way. Don't need to know how many years, but it was a while ago. And I got knocked out. I'm from New York originally. I was playing baseball and on asphalt, whatever. And I got knocked out. I fell and I banged my head. I don't remember it. I still to this day have no recollection of it. I woke up on the ambulance stretcher. And had MRI, CT, thank God everything was fine. But for a week afterwards, I couldn't function properly. I had very tired at the end. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I couldn't move. Sorry, just get rid of that. I couldn't move at the end of the day, and I was getting very bad headaches. Thank God it only lasted a week. But imagine that. I can only imagine if people have that constantly and they don't get better. I can't even begin to imagine how you live with that. And I only had it for a week at 17. So it's just like, so I really even understand it to a minute degree to some extent.
Thanks for sharing that, Stephen. Can we, Elinor?
What everyone else? Yeah.
Elinor?
So echoing what everyone else is. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so echoing what everyone else has said, I think normally we have so many policies and procedures, don't we? And when it comes to something that's out of the ordinary, it's really difficult to manage that. And I think when we're looking at adjustments to returning to work, it can be quite unusual then for a brain injury survivor, and it's knowing what practices to put in place for someone. Someone explained it really nice to me that it's like building a house of playing cards, because it's such a fine balance, isn't it? And you can be going away and managing quite well for a while once all these things have been put in place, but then something changes, the person's job role might change a bit, or all that work becomes a bit too heavy, and then the house of cards just falls down and you have to rebuild it again. So that was a really good analogy that someone explained to me, and I use that with some of my clients as well. I think as well with the headway and guide that Barry was talking about, I've used that as well, and there's some really useful resources in there.
Thanks, Elinor. I think the discussion up until this point leads up to possibly this core question of what more can and should be done to support brain injury survivors at work, and of course those looking to return to work. You know, what more would actually improve that position, both for employers and for those in work and those seeking to return to work. Jyoti, I don't mean to pick on you, but you mentioned systems, and it'd be quite interesting to understand whether or not the system currently works for those that are in work and those that are seeking to return to work.
Sorry, you broke up a little bit there, but I'm going to go with a guess about it's how we can support. So from my point of view, the key element is vocational rehab. That's a key thing for anybody who wants to go back to work, wishing to return to work, because what they can do is they can emulate what sort of stuff you might do at work and to see how you can do it and how best adjustments are made. But again, that's accessing professionals in a timely manner. And at the moment, it's the brain injury pathway, if that's the way we want to put it, out in the community, helping people to get their independence back, to get back to work is difficult. And so it is dependent on, you know, major trauma centres and acute hospitals and the education people get there. It's dependent on whether somebody is entitled to or is in the right postcode area for neuro rehab treatment. So there's a lot of different systems and variables at play, and some of it comes from the government in terms of commissioning of services, and some of it's from the voluntary sectors who identify those gaps in the services to be able to help people to get back to work. And so if we're thinking about how to best support people to get back into the workplace, because it's so important to do that, we are talking about services like vocational rehab, community neuro rehab teams, the voluntary sectors where possible. So Headway, Headwise, all these places, the brain tumor charities, you know, so depending, because there's specific associations for people. So you have the Stroke Association, and all of these different associations together provide a system-based treatment. So it allows the person to think about their work, think about their illness, and to think about how to move forwards. And I think, like I said, it's the recognition that the services are needed, and then it's about where do we locate those services, because some parts of the country are rich in brain injury services, and then some aren't. And people, they may not have the means and ability to travel 100 miles down the road to their nearest centre to be able to engage in rehab twice a week. It's costly. If you're not working and have a brain injury, how are you going to get there? And so there are all these blocks in place for community support. And this is something I'm really passionate about, because I really think that everybody in the last 15 years of being qualified I've spoken to, nobody wants to sit around. Everybody wants their independence back and to get back into work. They just don't know how to do it. And as professionals, sometimes our hands are tied, because we can suggest things and recommend things, but if it's not available in that person's locality, how do you then source something for someone? And that shouldn't be a block. So there should be services and bespoke packages that are arranged for people. But in reality, how often does that happen? And it makes me really sad that people, aren't able to get back into something that really gives them a sense of purpose and their identity and their independence back. And it's not because they don't want to, it's because sometimes the services and the means just aren't available. So the system's there to prop up and support that person. They're not there. And then you're trying to do the best job with what you've got.
Barry, thanks for that, Jyoti.
Sorry, I'm now paranoid that Jyoti can see my scribble notes, because it's like she's reading my scribble notes that I've made yesterday. I think the importance of vocational rehab, it cannot be overstated. I think it is so essential. I suppose I'm coming from it from the perspective, I work for a case management company. So we're dealing with people who've got PI claims. So that funds a lot of the vocational thing. But when I started in case management 12, 13 years ago, one of the big things that people struggled with was talking to people about work. People were more likely to ask the question about their sex lives than they were to talk about their employment, which was really strange. Thankfully, that's moved on. And I think the importance of vocational specialists, case managers, is really, really important. There's some fantastic people doing great things. So I'm going to name drop like Spencer Rathborn at Karen Bergen Limited or Lynn Atkins. There's some amazing, really experienced vocational case managers who specialize in brain injury work. And we bring these guys in. We're clinical case managers. We do a lot of vocational stuff. But once it gets to that level where you've got where there's new jobs, new training requirements, if you bring in a specialist vocational rehab, you can, an expression I always use, you can spin gold. Really, you can achieve great things. And I suppose a lot of it has got to do with the fact that people are surviving brain injuries that 5 years ago they weren't, and that's brilliant. That is amazing. But that brings challenges, and it's about reflecting that challenge in work. There's been such a huge tie between working and benefits. That's been conditioned almost into us as a society. If somebody doesn't work, that means they're drawing benefits, and that affects people in kind of a detrimental effect on people's well-being and their self-worth. So I think when you talk to people about getting back to work, it's about getting across the importance of work to them. And if let's be honest, none of us would do this if we didn't need the money. Anyone sitting around this room, we all do different things, but I'm sure we all have bills to pay, and that's quite important. Sorry, I'm ranting on, which I tend to do. I think processes in place, more vocational rehab, whether that's privately funded. There's some great charity organisations. Headway, again, I'll keep banging on about that. And the Headway to Work scheme that they did in the Northeast, that was a great thing. A great pilot. You should look into that. It's a really good project that Headway County Durham was involved in. So I'm very proud of that. Sorry, I'll stop talking now. Sorry,
Barry, that was what comes across when you speak and listening to Jyoti is your passion for the subject and for improving things as well. I don't know, Stephen or Elinor, if you've got any thoughts on what more can and should be done. Elinor?
Yeah, I think as an occupational therapist, I couldn't advocate any more for vocational rehab. As Jyoti and Barry have said, in terms of giving a sense of purpose and that person's identity, it's so important, and finding someone meaning. So we have a range of different clients and a range of abilities and potential for rehab within our service. And one of our gentlemen that stood out to us, he was a plasterer, he fell off some scaffolding, but as soon as he was able to, we had him helping with our maintenance team. So and in the end, he was seeking out jobs, and he was probably a bit of a team lead for them, really, and he's gone back to work now, self-employed, and it just shows, he went from not being really very motivated day to day to finding that purpose, and it was such a good outcome for us. But it's so important, but it's finding those opportunities for people, isn't it? And as Jyoti was saying, it's such a vast difference in different areas. It very much is a postcode lottery, and sometimes we have to be very creative with how we can find those opportunities. And across Elysium, we have different services, sort of making job descriptions for our different clients. If we can't have someone going out to work, then we will create those opportunities here. So even if it's something such as making a newsletter or help working as a gardener, we find those opportunities and then get them out to somewhere like Headway as well. Thank you for feeding back about the Headway to Work scheme, Barry. I'm going to look into that, see if there's something similar down our way, because I hadn't heard of that before. So I appreciate that.
Stephen, I'm quite interested in whether or not legislation and jurisprudence more widely is keeping pace with the changing needs of brain injury survivors seeking to get back into the workplace? Are there changes and developments in terms of legislation that have been helpful?
Yeah, I'll answer just before I do. Barry, you don't have to be so hard on yourself. I think your passion, it's channeled in a very positive way. I think it's passion like that changes things for the positive. So people can rant about things that are a waste of time and just don't really have any positive effect. But people like you, passion like that will bear positive fruit, I'm sure. So don't worry about it. It's good to see. It's good to see. Right. So just going back to your question, Alistair. So we've all seen the recent news in the last 24, 48 hours about the employment bill that the new Labour government's looking to pass. So, I mean, that will be helpful in the sense that people will have more protection from day one. People have more protection from day one in terms of flexible working or unfair dismissal. So I think it's, while not addressing specifically brain injury, it'll, I think, a good unintentional consequence is that, again, if people start a job and within a short space of time, God forbid, something happens, or if they start a job and they thought they can cope and then they can't cope, they fully disclose their condition, but then they can start, I need flexible working. I want to make some changes. Don't want to work. I want to do my responsibilities. They're not trying to get out of what they've signed up to do, but they just want to make it work. And and so I think that can certainly be positive. We'll have to wait to see what this says 2-year consultation, and there could be lots of changes before any of that passes. I'm just going on what's been reported in the news, but that I think can be very, very positive if utilized the right way. And obviously, as solicitors, we just step in where, unfortunately, the government agencies, there's a shortfall. There's limited funds, obviously, whether it's the NHS or whatever. They do fantastic jobs, but everyone's only human, and so we try to get private funding to fill those gaps. As part of the claim, it's not always easy because different doctors, different OTs will say you need different amounts of help. So it's not always easy to get that funding. And there is a ceiling, even in the private sector. They're not just going to fund things, forever with a blank check. But we try to fill the gap where we can, and we're successful, but again, to a degree. So that's where I think the legal comes in, is really when they need extra help or to the waiting lists are very long, and it's in the insurance company's interest to get treatment early, because the earlier the treatment, sometimes the better the prognosis, the more likelihood of an improvement, if not a full improvement, at least a substantial improvement. So, we try to pull that string on them, saying, listen, you're an insurance company, you only care about the bottom line. Give this person £100,000 so they can get a very expensive treatment, but that may, in the long run, save you multiples of that. If the person gets better, there's a less loss of earnings claim, there's less future care claim. I always tell people I hate talking about them like they're a number, but sometimes that's the only way to get a result with the insurance companies, and to them, the insurance, but the reality is there is success if you do it that way, within reason, of course. So I think that's where we come in as lawyers.
Thanks, Stephen. Would anybody like to provide any sort of examples of innovation with reference to supporting the brain injury community, whether that's technology related or whether it's just new ways of working or new approaches that are having a positive impact?
Well, I suppose the working from home, the fact that we're now sitting on a virtual meeting platform, that's improved so much. March 2020, the whole industry changed so much, and in every one of our sectors. So the flexible working that's supposed to be in the legislation that they're passing at present, that opens a lot of opportunities for people, so they can be more flexible when they're working from home. The fact that you don't need to haul yourself to an office. Our company is based in Derby. I live in Northumberland. Our case managers are all over the UK, and we can have weekly meetings, daily meetings, no problem, because of platforms like this. And I think for brain injury people, I think that's for people who've had brain injuries, that opens up opportunities, because you can write, I've got a meeting for an hour. Okay, I need to rest for the next 20 minutes. In a home environment, you can do that. In an office environment, it might be very chaotic office environment to try and replicate that. So that obviously opens up huge opportunities to people, and it's about embracing that, and it's about kind of making sure it works for them, not necessarily that it's, the whole thing of working from home. Are you working from home or are you living at work? I think it's important to get that balance right. So I think from innovation, I think the technology teams, like Zoom, all these different technologies have made a huge difference.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. Jyoti?
And I think just to follow on from Barry, that's where hybrid working is quite helpful as well. So that ability to work from home is important, but then there's that time you get to go and do the social elements of being out at work with your colleagues, even if it's for half a day or a day. I think that also helps, because again, what we don't want to do is to live in a bubble of just being at home and not around other people, because that social interaction we have with our colleagues is really important as well. But working from home certainly has made a massive difference to people, because if you can't drive because you've had a head injury, a working from home job is perfect. But it's also important to recognize, and I'm talking from a psychology point of view here, is that connection, the interactions and the relationships we build with our work colleagues as well. So hybrid working, again, also is really good. The other thing is a lot of companies have their own platforms they work on. So they'll have their own secure servers where you can access everything you need to, and I think that's really innovative, because once upon a time, even in the NHS, you would have to go to work to do some things. Whereas now, if you just need access to the note system to write a report, you can do that in the peace and quiet of your own home. So that's just one example. But I think the other thing is there's a lot of new, certainly within the brain injury environment, there's a lot of new technology coming through. So Rehab is one of them that I've used. It does a full assessment of a person's cognition. It looks at their eyesight. It looks at everything. And then what it does is the system is very intuitive, and it devises a program for where it recognizes there are deficits. And then the person can do that from home. So they don't need to necessarily come into a unit or a hospital to have that treatment. They can do that from home and come in once every 4 weeks for reassessment. So again, we're sort of moving with the times. In cognitive assessments, once upon a time, I would only be able to do them face to face. Now, a lot of the new assessments we use and buy as part of their gold standard, you can administer them remotely. Again, that's really helpful for those people who can't get to you. So the advancements are there. We just need to keep going with it, but not forget that social element as well.
Thanks, Jyoti. We've covered quite a lot of ground, and just before we sort of draw to a conclusion, can I ask the panelists if there's anything that we haven't covered that anybody would like to raise or like to address? If not, Stephen.
I was going to say, I think it's been pretty comprehensive. I think the main points are obviously working with people, working with employers, obviously having the correct medical team in place if there's a claim, having the correct lawyer in place, and things. I think people are becoming more aware. I think people are, and I think the key is to just try to work with people, not work against them. I think working with people. Again, most people are amenable. Most people, if it can work, they're going to make it work. I think that's really important.
Thanks, Stephen. I'd quite like the panelists to just let us hear their sort of final thoughts, and just to focus that, if there were one or two things that you think would make a significant difference to brain injury survivors in the workplace and members of the brain injury community that want to get back into the workplace, what would it be if you could change one or two things to make the experience more positive in the workplace and for those wanting to return to work? What would it be? I'll go around the panel in the same order again. Elinor, final thoughts from you on those things?
Yeah, so I think flexibility, that's one of the key things. And then for myself as a clinician, I think when the person's coming through the pathway from the acute phase to the rehab phase, it's within the referrals, always people being mindful of the fact that that person might want to return to work, and always having that at the forefront of people's minds, and not forgetting that that person might want to return to work, and that could be a very realistic goal.
Great, thanks, Elinor. Jyoti, same question to do, the things that would make a big difference.
I think the key thing for me is the being able to access the appropriate services in a timely manner. So being able to access community neuro rehab, being able to access vocational rehab, I think that's really important. And I think that hopefully that's something the government is working on. I know they're working on a new brain injury document, so I'm hopeful that they'll recognise that there are gaps within services that are provided. And the second thing I think which would really help is educating employers on misconceptions. So things like, I just made a few notes, that a phased return for brain injury is similar to other conditions. Well, sometimes it's not. It's about taking into account the cognitive element, or thinking once that phased return is done, we've done our job. But sometimes people need that little bit more adjustment over time because other things crop up. So I think working with companies, getting them to understand, but then on the other part, working to get services there. I think those are two important things.
Brilliant, thanks, Jyoti. And hopefully there are some legislators that will be watching this and paying attention, and those that hold the purse strings as well for some of those services. Thanks, Jyoti. Barry, final thoughts?
I suppose just to reflect what Elinor and Jyoti have said, and also I suppose kind of the magic wand would be if we could have a greater awareness within communities about brain injury. We don't have many celebrity endorsements for brain injuries. It is still very much a hidden disability, and I think if it's almost a very binary thing. Oh, they've had a brain injury, but they've survived, and that's fine. And whereas I think if we had more of an awareness of the impact of brain injuries on individuals, there's some amazing work going on to educate and public awareness, but it's not there yet. And I think if we had a greater understanding, I think that would, across society, that would definitely pour down into workplaces, and then people would be more understanding of their co-workers and their employees.
Yeah, that would make a massive difference, wouldn't it? Thanks, Barry. And you get the final word, Stephen.
Yeah, so I just really what everyone, I mean, in terms of where the NHS, that's really not my area, but as they're doing a review, I think to have some sort of clear document about how people are affected and what things employers or helping them can do to ease their transition back into a more mainstream sort of life. I'm not talking about even a 20-page book, booklet. I'm talking about page or two with the bullet points, the main points, because that people probably look at that. If it's something that's going to be 20 pages long, no one's going to read it, no one's going to bother. So something nice and concise that will help them ease back into society, and then that also I think raise awareness at the same time. And then, just part of the review, I think if there's one central document with the NHS on it, so people know it's legit and people know it carries weight, then hopefully that would help.
Thanks, Stephen. And on behalf of NR Times, can I just say a really big thank you to all of our panelists who have been so generous with their time and their experience and their insight. It's been a fabulous discussion. One which I'm sure will stimulate further discussions on the NR Times platform. To all those that are watching, please share this as widely as possible. A discussion like this and the themes it's aired deserve to be seen and understood by as many people as possible. So once again, thanks for watching, and thank you very much indeed to all of our panelists. Thank you.